Alright, my name is Evan Jordan, and this is going to be my mutual funds project for Finance 451 with John Cresson. So the overview of the project, so we choose 6 mutual funds from 3 separate sectors, and you pick one you like and one you didn't like. I actually picked 9 mutual funds. I chose 3 from each sector. I kind of chose 2 outliers, one I liked, one I didn't like, and one that's pretty mediocrely or average. I did this to get a better overview of kind of what mutual funds were in general. I haven't really looked into many mutual funds, and this is kind of like the first thing I've kind of heard about it in our 451 class. So I kind of wanted to dive a little bit more in depth into mutual funds, I guess you could say, to try to learn more about how they work and what their expected things are. So all of my data is pulled from Morningstar. I used Fidelity to look up different mutual funds and in the different sectors, but I pulled most of my stuff from Morningstar. We're going to look at the different turnover rates, the expense ratios, the status of the mutual fund. Is it open or is it closed to new investors? If it has any minimums, like minimum buy-ins, or if it has new management, we're going to look at that. And how the managers manage their funds. We're also going to look a little bit into prices. Prices don't necessarily determine whether it's necessarily a good investment or a bad investment. So it just depends on what you're willing to spend and how much you're willing to get in return for how much you actually spent. Alright, so we can get into it. So the first one I did was the International Fund. So I used Fidelity International Enhanced Index Fund. The Fidelity Overseas Fund, and the Fidelity International Growth Fund. So looking at these 3 separate mutual funds, I see a clear outlier here. I think the Fidelity International Enhanced Index Fund is a clear-cut winner in this situation, even though the price is pretty low. The expense ratio is very high. Alright, it's very low. Expense ratio is low at 0.59%, which is good. It means you're not paying that much expenses, anything like that. Your turnover ratio is a whopping 66%, which is very, very good for such a low price. And you're looking at a manager who made his tenure in 2007. He's very experienced with this fund, and he's had it since he started there. There is no minimum buy-in, and the status is open, so it's open to new investors at all times. I would say that your outlier and one that I wouldn't want to invest in this situation would be the International Growth Fund. It's got a 1.03% expense ratio with a low turnover rate of 22%. It is a good manager of the fund. I guess it's just not producing the way it should be. It's very experienced. Like, the guy's very experienced in this fund. He's owned it since 2007. There's also no minimum buy-in in the open. It's also an open status with a $12 price. Kind of the medium international fund that I looked at was the Fidelity Overseas Fund. The turnover ratio of 33% and the expense ratio of 1%. Most of the ones that I looked at were roughly around 1% of the expense ratio and about 40% of the turnover ratio. And this one's actually new to these type of funds. He doesn't necessarily involve himself in international funds, the manager. But there's also no minimum buy-in, and there's an open status, and it's a $45. So next we're going to look at the sector funds, the Fidelity Select Financial Service Report, the Fidelity Select Transportation Portfolio, and the Fidelity Insurance part. I looked to try to find huge outliers in this scenario for expense ratios, but they were all roughly about from 0.75 to 0.8%. So I think the winner here is going to be your Fidelity Select Financial Services Report. It's got a higher turnover ratio than the other two, with about a medium expense ratio. So this fund is actually under a new manager. So the previous manager has pushed this fund to, I guess, with a high expense rate or a low expense ratio and a high turnover ratio, which is good. There are no minimum buy-ins in most of the funds that we're talking about today. This fund is also an open status with a $10.45. So I think the loser in this scenario is going to be your insurance port, the Fidelity Insurance Port. They have a 0.79 expense ratio, which is actually really good, but their turnover ratio is 21% compared to the winner of 54%. But the guy who has this The manager is kind of new, relatively new to the firm. He joined in 2013, and this is actually his first or second fund that he received when he started working there. It is an open status, and it's about $66 to buy in. And to find out your medium, so roughly the average turnover ratio for these funds was about 45%. So his expense ratio is a little bit higher, not much higher than the insurance port, but his turnover ratio is a lot better. The manager that owns it, received the fund in 2012, but joined the company in 2007. So he's been using mutual funds, not necessarily these types of mutual funds, but he's been using them since 2007. And it's also an open status with a pretty good price of $98. Our last one we're going to look at is going to be domestic funds. So the Fidelity Value Discovery, Fidelity Large Cap Stock, and the Fidelity Over the Counter Exchange. So this one has your turnover ratios. The average was roughly 50. I couldn't really get a good estimate on averages, but it was roughly 50. When you look at your lower expense ratio and your highest turnover ratio, you're probably going to have to go with the large cap stock. It's got the lowest expense ratio with a medium turnover ratio, which is kind of, I guess, is what you're kind of looking for when you're looking to invest. So the guy who's been here, he's managed this fund since 2005. So he's been managing this fund for a while, so he's kind of built up himself looking at, is he trustworthy to invest your money in? And I think your clear-cut loser here, not really clear-cut, I guess you could say, is the over-the-counter. It's got it's got the highest expense ratio of all the ones that I saw, with an outstanding turnover ratio compared to the rest of them. But the guy is a brand new manager, like he just started a year ago. But he's looking at his turnover rates is 71%, which isn't bad. His open status is $10.75. So if you're looking for your medium, kind of like your clear cut, I can easily make money. You're going to go with your Fidelity Value Discover at 69% in your turnover rate with a 0.69% expense ratio and your turnover at 33%. This guy received this fund in 2012, but he joined in 2006. So he's been working with mutual funds and through Fidelity for, about 12 years now. So he's pretty experienced with mutual funds. There is no minimum, and it's an open status with a 27.9%. I hope this video helped. Have a good one.